Hey everyone, this is WREL's hidden historian Heather Leah, and today I'm here to talk to you about a cold case and an unsolved murder that's gaining national attention again after more than 50 years. Now, if you've heard of the Walking Tall movies or folk hero Sheriff Buford Pusser, then you may know about the unsolved murder of his wife, Pauline Pusser. Well, this week, after 5 decades, they're exhuming Pauline's grave, and they're finally going to do an autopsy on her body that was never done right after she was killed. Whatever her autopsy results show, it'll reveal information that many have wondered about for decades. I'm joined by historian, folklorist, and author Oakley Dean Baldwin, and he's a retired law enforcement officer and a relative of Pauline's, and he's written a book that has delved way deeper into the circumstances surrounding her death. He's going to talk to us a little bit more about the case, some of the inconsistencies that he thinks that he's found, how her family feels about her body being exhumed after all this time, and really just details that you may not know as this case kind of comes back to life and heats up again. Thank you for being with me today to explore this cold case a little bit. Let's jump right into it. Tell me who you are and just a little bit about this cold case that's more than 50 years old and what it's all about.
Sure. My name is Oakley Dean Baldwin. I'm an author and a folklorist in and around Raleigh, North Carolina. And I write stories about family issues, mainly dramas and thrillers and true crime stories. So today, the hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit about the Walking Tall series. They made a handful of movies back in the 70s. And recently, with Dwayne Johnson, also known as The Rock, he did one based on the sheriff of McNairy County, Tennessee, by the name of Buford Pusser. And Buford married Pauline Mullins, who is a distant relative of mine. And I started getting interested in this story as far as writing it back in 2019, 2020 during COVID. And I spent a lot of time, a couple of years researching it. And as I was coming up with a lot of questions that I didn't like being from a law enforcement background. I came across a lot of questions, and that leads up to the actual homicide or the murder of Pauline Mullins while she was riding in the car with Sheriff Buford Pusser.
Yeah, so this is a pretty famous cold case. Tell me a little bit about the narrative that we currently have about what happened and how she was killed.
You know, he reported that he received a disturbance call at his home at the end of his shift. He had just taken his uniform off and that he had to go back out. So he got dressed. And of course, Pauline wanted to know what was going on. And his story is that Pauline was a willing ride along at 2 in the morning, that would raise the red flag with me right off the bat, because back in the 60s and 70s, you could do a ride along with your spouse, but it was like on a Sunday afternoon with no calls. And if you got a hot call or a disturbance call, you would surely drop your spouse off at a safe location and then go answer the call. So when I heard that, that really raised a red flag with me. And then the chief deputy later said during the investigation that the shooting was around 4:30, or the ambush was around 4:30 a.m. So now we have a time gap of 2.5 hours between the time they got the call and the time of the massacre or the actual shooting. The ride from his house to the club was only a 20-minute ride. So there's a big gap in time, and that's another red flag. And then the actual route that they took the longest route. They didn't take the shortcut. They went the back roads. And that's confusing to me because he was known for being heavy footed and fast to the scene. In fact, he had one car accident where he was driving so fast he flipped the car over and it crushed the top. And if you look at the photographs, he's got injuries where he had broke this eye socket right here. That's not from this shooting at all. This was a separate incident. So investigating the homicide of Pauline, I did find crime scene photographs of the vehicle, and it was hit 11 times. They found 14 shells on the ground, so they missed a few times. But those blood splatters really gathered my attention. Buford's Pusser's story was that Pauline was shot in the car and he was in the car. But when you look at the blood splatters at the right front portion of the fender, heading back towards the windshield, there's a lot of blood splatter across the car. And something happened there. Somebody was wounded there. So that doesn't make any sense to the statements the sheriff was making.
It's been over 50 years. Why do you think they didn't do one then, and why now are they wanting to do this?
There was basically two different organizations. They fell under the governor back then. It was more political, and Sheriff Buford Pusser was well known and well liked, and some say he was doing a very good job. I know one year he did break up 28 stills, so that's a lot of stills. Most people don't get that in a lifetime. Some only get one in a lifetime, so that's a lot of stills. It also would make a lot of people mad at you too. But he had a very weird, what I would say, a weird career. A lot of questionable shootings. He also not murdered. He also shot and killed two other people, and both times he was. The jury said the grand jury didn't bring any charges against him. And then I hear that there was some information that was left out of those grand juries.
Oh, can you talk about that information at all?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. There was a Louise Hathcock was shot and killed, and it went before a grand jury, and they basically did not pull an indictment. And then later, one of my author friends named Mike Elam contacted me. He also wrote a book about the life of Buford Pusser, and we compared notes on a lot of the evidence. But he got a copy of her autopsy report, and it shows the story much different from her body wounds than was actually told by the sheriff. So there's discrepancies there. And one is that the autopsy states that she was shot in the back and it came out on the lower part of her chest. And that would indicate at one point that she had her back to him. But now there's always a possibility. We know in shootings that people will spin if they're shot. Sometimes like if you get shot here in the shoulder, it'll cause you to spin from the 357 Magnum will definitely cause the body to move. And then the second shot could have been in the back. We don't know. But there's a lot of different evidence that people are looking at with a lot of skepticism right now because of the way it's falling.
That makes sense. And just to be clear, this autopsy report was for a different person that he had shot, not his wife. We're just talking
Correct.
about other possible indiscrepancies that have kind of showed up throughout his career, right?
Yeah, correct.
And I've heard that he was sort of a legend, like a folk hero in a way, or at least that's how the Walking Tall movies portray him. Um, what would it mean for this autopsy report to show something unexpected?
Well, yeah, if it shows that she was assaulted or strangled or cut or had defensive wounds, which she should have none of the above that I just listed, then you have to look at who was the only person with her and what were they doing for those 2.5 hours before the ambush. And then it just puts a whole light on everything. And then on the other hand, if it shows that she has nothing but the head wound, then it actually should give the family a little more comfort that at least Pauline wasn't murdered by her husband, or wasn't he wasn't the trigger man. At least it doesn't mean that somebody else it wasn't hired or anything. You have to look at you always the husband or the spouse is always the first person you have to rule out, and that's not just Buford Pusser. That's in any homicide.
That makes sense. And you do have a background in law enforcement, as well as you are in some way related to Pauline Pusser. Am I correct?
Yeah, we're distant cousins. She's from Hayti, Virginia, which is in Dickinson County, and that's where my Mullins family are from also. And they're pretty much all related. It was a very big family. She moved to Chicago. She actually married a gentleman named Vance and had 3 children with him. And then she divorced him and married Buford Pusser when he was actually a wrestler up in Chicago, long before he even became sheriff of McNairy County.
Wow. Yeah. So you do have a personal interest in this,
Mhm.
and of course have really gone above and beyond with looking at the history and as much as possible and really delving into it. Because of that, you have this book that
Mhm.
if you want to show us the book, yeah.
Yeah, I'll show
Um,
it again.
yeah, so you have this book, and that's going to really dig into some of the more of the story as well as potential indiscrepancies. And I mean, you might have a second book or more to add depending on how this autopsy report goes, right?
Yeah, and I interviewed a lot of Pauline's, two of her brothers and a sister, and some cousins, nephews, and nieces during my 2 year investigation into this story. That's why I really do want to tell your readers in your group to take a look at the book, because up until Mike Elam's book and my book, all the previous, there's half a dozen books written, and they were pretty much fan based books and went by the script of the Walking Tall movies. And then we came along and started writing, oh, we have questions here. So now everybody raising the flag up. And I'm sure the biggest flag so far now has been this autopsy request.
Yeah. Can I ask you just briefly for a little preview, what's her family said about her death? Did they have any concerns or thoughts themselves on what happened?
Well, they actually did not have anything bad to say about her husband. And as far as I know, they had a normal relationship, but they all lived in Virginia and she was in Tennessee. And she may not have shared a lot of things, the private type things. We're not sure. But I do understand that there have been more eyewitnesses that were gave testimony to the TBI in order for them to reopen this case. And some of them have stories to tell where there was some minor domestic violence issues, and maybe Pauline might have even been leaving him or planning to leave him at the time of her demise.
Wow. Well, it sounds like a lot more information could finally come out after all these years. Um, Can I ask you, have you mentioned to me before you've been getting some calls, the TBI has called you. Have you gotten any contacts about your book given all of this going on?
Oh yes, I've been getting a lot of questions and some additional information on Facebook and on emails. It's sort of like this has been a very hot weekend for this story, and it's a breaking news story. If just the fact that the TBI opened it up and did the autopsy is a breaking story, and I'm sure that there's going to be people, anyone who's ever watched the movies back in the '70s will want to know this information.
Yeah, definitely. I know a lot of people have commented on the story that we did already on WRAL's website and on television. So I'm really grateful that you were willing to talk with me like this and just kind of go a little bit more in depth than we can do in a quick television package and get this all put together. And I'm sure people are going to be watching closely. Is there anything else that we should know or be looking at?
I think once you read my book, stay tuned and let's see what the TBI comes up with. Normally 6 to 7 weeks, maybe. It just depends on, I guess, how backed up the facility is. But it could be world-shaking news, or it could be a lot of people feeling relieved that the sheriff did not kill his wife.
Yeah, I mean, either way, it'll be good to know. It'll be good to know more. So,
Yes.
well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today, and I guess we'll keep in touch and find out maybe what happens in a few weeks.
Thank you, Heather, and it's so nice to talk to you.